There we go. Okay, welcome to the Small and Backyard Flocks Community of Practice webinar series. My name is Dr. Jackie Jacob, and I'm at the University of Kentucky, and I am the coordinator for the Small and Backyard Flocks Community of Practice. As part of that, we have been doing regular webinars. Since about February, we've been doing it every other month, every other week, and tailing it specifically for small and backyard flocks with mostly targeting new beginners, but it is, of course, applicable to others. I will put the links in the chat box, and you can see the past recordings as well as the future webinars. So today's webinar is going to be on biosecurity for small and backyard flocks producers, which will, of course, prevent disease from entering your small flocks. Our presenter today is Dr. Claudia Dunkley from the University of Georgia Department of Poultry Science. As you'll be able to tell from her accent, she's originally from Jamaica, but she did her bachelor's and master's degree at Prairie View A&M University and her PhD at Texas A&M University, and she's based in Tifton, Georgia. She does a lot of work on environmental and waste management, but she also has work with small and backyard flocks. So I'm going to turn it over to Claudia. As I said, I will be on mute. You won't see me unless you have a question specific to what she's talking about, either in the Q&A box or in the chat box. All yours, Claudia.
All right. Thank you, Jackie. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all well after the storms that has passed through some parts of the country. We're quite hot here in South Georgia. I'm going to talk to you about biosecurity for small flock producers. And when I say small flock, from 5 birds up to 10,000 birds, that's what we're talking about. Biosecurity, what is it really? See, I can get the slide going, right? When we talk about biosecurity, we are talking about any practice that we use to limit the spread of disease-causing organisms, or any practice within your operation that will prevent disease from breaking out within your flock. Now, disease is a natural fact of nature, right? You'll have diseases in birds. You're going to have deaths in birds as a result of diseases. The ability to resist disease is called immunity, and birds obtain immunity in 3 basic ways. The first way, it's passed from the hen to the chick. The second way is through vaccination, and the third way is through natural exposure to disease. And it's important to know this when we're talking about biosecurity, because we have to know the source of the disease outbreak. The current diseases of concern in the US would be, when it comes to poultry, would be the HPAI, or the pathogenic avian influenza. This is a viral disease, and the most recent outbreaks was last year. We had that major outbreak starting in the fall of 2014, and up to 2019, we have had outbreaks in avian influenza. And over these years, they have caused major economic losses and not only in the affected areas, because as a result of the outbreak in the country, we had we could not export birds to a lot of different places. So about 50 million birds were killed during the outbreak. So you can understand that economic impact that would have. Now, HPAI can strike very quickly and without warning, and it's important for all producers, whether or not you're a commercial contract producer or a backyard producer, it's important for you to know about this type of disease and the impact it can have. It's spread by migratory wild birds as they fly south during the winter. And the pathways that they migrate through takes them over much of the US. And they deposit the virus along the way, and it can affect, as I said, commercial birds, recreational birds, and backyard flocks. Now, this diagram here basically is showing you the different flyways of these migrating birds. So we have the Pacific Flyway, the Central Flyway, the Mississippi Flyway, and the Atlantic Flyway. Now, when you're talking about biosecurity, you have to focus on several things. First, you want to prevent the introduction of disease. So you're going to set up a biosecurity program for your specific farm that will prevent the introduction of disease. In the case that there is disease there, you should also have a plan that prevents it from spreading. And you should have surveillance systems so that you can be aware of what is taking place, not only on your farm, but in surrounding areas. A number of factors affect or influence biosecurity. Pest is one of them. Location, where is your farm located? Is it isolated, separate from all other animal operations, far away from traffic? How do you remove your waste? What kind of biosecurity procedures do you have in place? How do you clean and disinfect after each flock? And how many disease outbreaks you have, whether it's per year or over a period of time. So to prevent pathogen transfer, we have to be cognizant of trafficking, both human and equipment trafficking. We have to know and be aware of the different vectors that spread diseases. We have to dispose of our mortality properly. Be aware of contaminated water sources and contaminated feed sources. Know that pathogens can be transmitted through the air, and also be aware of vertical transmission. That's through the eggs from the parent flock. These are the different ways in which the pathogens can be passed on to your birds. Now, inside the facility, you have to watch for fecal to oral transmission. That is, birds eating droppings. They can pick up, of course, different pathogens that way. What about water droplets through, whether a bird is sneezing? So that would be aerosol. And then our mechanical vectors are going to be like the equipment that's inside of the houses. So your watering can, is it dirty? Your feeders, is that dirty? How often do you clean your litter? And then we have the biological vectors. Now, our biological vectors are going to be flies, mosquitoes, pet birds, wild birds, those migrating birds, big nuisance, rodents, your pets, whether dogs or cats, and beetles that can be found in the litter inside the houses. All of these vectors are ways in which diseases can be transferred from bird to bird and can spread throughout your flock. So what is the plan? What are you going to do? You want to eliminate these risks. You want to manage the risks that you can't eliminate, because there's not everything that you can eliminate. You have to have a farm-specific biosecurity program. So that means I can't write a biosecurity program that will satisfy all of you, right? Each farm has to have a specific biosecurity program that fits that farm. You have to have best management practices for each area of the farm, and do a risk assessment at the end of a period. to see how well this plan that you have in place is working. So biosecurity program, best management programs should be there for the producers, the farm workers, visitors, vendors, vehicles, and so on. Have a plan for each part of your operation. If you have a small operation, well, you probably won't have any vendors coming to your farm. If you have a larger operation, you'll have more vehicles coming on the farm, right? So if you have, say, a petting farm, you have to have a biosecurity program for that. So whatever different areas you have on the farm, you should have a program, have a best management plan for that section. Some of us have different age birds, so you have a plan that will take care of that. When do you look after these birds, sick birds? All of these plans need to, you have to put something in place, best management practices to help to ensure that diseases is not going to be spreading from young to old, old to young. A plan for each part of the operation. How do you store your feed? So there should be a plan for your feed area. Water storage, how often you clean that water, how often you clean equipment. One thing in your biosecurity for the farm is that you should know that the flock owner and the caretakers should not be exposed to other poultry. And after handling wild game, you need to change your clothes and shower. Remember, most of these diseases are coming from wild birds who tend to be carriers of some of these diseases, but they are not going to be showing signs of illness, right? So when you go hunting and you come back, you can't be looking after your birds in that same clothes that you wore hunting. Disposing of dead bird properly is very important, right? Especially if you have a disease outbreak. So you don't want these microbes or pathogenic microbes that cause the death of these birds to be spread into the other birds. So that is important to make sure you have a mortality disposal program, whether it is burial, this is gonna depend on your area, your state. Do you have an incinerator? Do you burn the birds? Or are you composting the birds? Whatever method you're using, make sure that it's done properly. You also want to post restrict signs on drives and building entrances coming into your operation, right? You don't want just anyone walking through because you really don't know where they're coming from if they've been exposed to pathogens. All right, so let us talk a little bit about sanitation. Sanitation is going to eliminate the disease-causing organism. It's the reduction of pathogenic organism numbers to levels at which they do not pose a disease threat to their host. Then you have sterilization, which is the destruction of all infective and reproductive forms of microorganisms, whether they are bacteria, fungi, virus, whatever. Sterilization will destroy any reproductive forms of these organisms. And then you have disinfection that will get rid of all vegetative forms of microorganisms. Make note that spores are not destroyed, right? So it's very hard to destroy spores, as this is that sleeping phase, as we call it, for these organisms that are spore forming. You have to make note of the type of surface that you're treating when you're talking about sterilizing or sanitizing or disinfecting, right? The type of surface. So if you have litter, it's gonna be different than if you have, say, a hard surface with no bedding material on it, right? The cleanliness of the surface. I always tell people that you can't disinfect dirt. Now, when you're washing, say, your equipment, if there is dropping on that, you would want to wash that off first before you disinfect it. The type of organism that you're treating also will, what you use to do the disinfection will determine that. Now, back to traffic control. You want to restrict a lot of trafficking on the farm. Depending on the size of your operation and what goes on there, you might want to have a visitor log to know who is coming in and how long they stay there and their reason for visiting. You want to also minimize traffic areas. So even if people will be coming in, they shouldn't be allowed to roam all over your operation. Remember, when we are looking after birds, if you have a farm that has different age birds, you go from the youngest to the oldest. You also go from the disease-free to the infected, right? A lot of times I ask some of these 4-Hers, so how would you look after these diseased birds? And they always say, well, we look after the sick ones first, but that's the opposite way of how we do it, right? So we look after the disease-free, and then you go on to the infected birds or the sick birds. You want to set up wash stations on your farm, right? Somewhere that you can wash your hands before you enter into the house. Foot baths. You always want to have foot baths to go into each part of your facility. Change the liquid regularly. And there are different types of materials that you can use for foot baths. It can be a wet bath, it could be dry chlorine or dry bleach. So it just depends on what you would like. Of course, the wet one is going to be messier going in and out, but you choose what works best for your facility. So there are different, again, this is repetition, looking at management practices that influence biosecurity. The first one, physical security of your buildings and grounds. So you should have one entrance, one exit, right? Perimeter fencing and security lights, that's important. Electronic security devices, put padlocks on your storage areas and computer control areas, and keep inventory records. A lot of times, small flock producers believe that this is not important for their little operation. But if you're doing this as a business, it's very important to secure your business. It's your investment. So physical security of your buildings and ground is very important. Again, going back to this visitor's log, develop a visitor policy, right? Post signs for the visitors to check in and designate specific areas for them to park, and keep a detailed record of the visit. Why do you have them visiting there? And do not allow unlimited access to the farm. Sometimes you have people who intentionally wants to cause harm, and sometimes they don't want to cause harm, but harm is caused because they are not aware of the different practices that they need to adhere to in order to keep your birds safe. So with that, you need to determine the need for the visit before authorizing it. If you have employees, they should be aware of biosecurity. A complete background check prior to employing. You want to train employees to recognize suspicious behavior of other employees and visitors. A lot of time you have people who are sneaking in on farms to discredit the poultry industry, right? Even though you have small operations, this doesn't shield you from things like this happening. So that is also important for your employees to be aware. You need an emergency response plan. So a current inventory of all hazardous and inflammable products on the farm. Remember, they should be kept in a safe place. If you have anything that's hazardous or inflammable, you should have a list of emergency contacts, including police, fire station, and hospitals, and a plan for evacuation of the farm. Employees on the farm should be provided with a site plan with the escape route, rendezvous location, location for firefighting equipment, and also, and importantly, first aid supplies. Disposal of dead birds in case of a catastrophic loss. So for instance, if you are unfortunate enough to be hit by avian influenza and you have all 5,000 birds dead, you have to have a plan in place of how you're going to get rid of those birds, right? You don't try to make that plan after the fact, after the birds are dead. Have that in place beforehand. So all of these must be included in your biosecurity plan. Then we have pest management, integrated pest management. So rats and flies, beetles, you need bait stations for rodents. For the insects, like the beetles or flies, you need an insecticide program. And what we find in the commercial setting is that after 1 or 2 sprayings, the beetles especially, they develop resistance to the insecticide. So it is wise to rotate insecticides to avoid this resistance developing within the beetle. You want to bird-proof your pens, right? Because remember, wild birds carry diseases that they are carriers of these diseases, which may not affect them. And even when they affect them, they might not be showing signs of diseases when they get on your property. So you need to bird-proof the pens to prevent the wild birds from having access to your flock. And I'm going to finish up looking at steps in which to keep disease off your backyard farm. So the first one is keep your distance. And you'll notice that a lot of these steps, these 6 steps, are covered in what I was talking about previously. So keep your distance. So you want to prevent access to your property and your birds. You want to prevent free roaming birds from mingling with your birds. You don't want non-caretakers to have access to your birds. You also don't want other bird owners to have access to your birds. Game birds and migratory fowls should not be encouraged on your property. Remember, they are carriers of a lot of diseases that would not harm them. The second one is keep it clean. So we want to wear clean clothes, right? Or particularly clothes that you're going to be going into the houses with, they should only be for that purpose, right? Scrub your shoes with disinfectant, wash your hands thoroughly before entering those bird areas. When cleaning cages, do it with disinfectant. You want to change the food and water daily. Now, depending on the type of equipment that you have, right? So if you have automatic feeders, automatic waterers, sure, you don't have to wash those daily. But if you have like some of those old bell waterers that will accumulate food and dirt and everything inside the water, those need to be cleaned on a daily basis. You want to clean and disinfect equipment that comes in contact with birds and with the drop-ins, and remove manure before disinfecting, right? We can't disinfect dirt. Dispose of dead birds properly, another thing that I spoke about. The third one is do not haul diseases home. So you want to clean and disinfect your car and truck tires poultry cages and equipment before going home, right? You can set up a spray station as you enter in your property. Get out the car, spray the car tires down before you go on the property where the birds are. You want to quarantine birds that have been to shows or exhibition for at least 2 weeks after the event, right? So after you take your birds to the shows, do not mix them with the birds that didn't go to the show right away. Quarantine them for 2 weeks before you actually let them mingle with the rest of the flock. Now you want to quarantine any new birds that you purchase, whether it's at auctions or at shows. You want to quarantine them from your flock for at least 30 days before letting them mingle with the original flock. Number 4, don't borrow diseases from your neighbor. So you try not to share farm and garden equipment, tools, and poultry supply with family or neighbors. But if you must, make sure that they are clean and disinfected thoroughly before taking them onto the property. Number 5, very important to know warning signs of infectious bird diseases, and this includes highly pathogenic avian influenza. So these are some of the signs of diseases that are highly pathogenic, or that will highly infective, that will spread throughout your flock quickly. So if you see a sudden increase in bird death, you have a problem. A lot of sneezing, coughing, and nasal discharge, you have something that's infectious. Watery and green diarrhea, lack of energy and poor appetite. There's a drop in egg production, increase in soft or thin shell eggs, swelling around the eyes, neck, and head, purple discoloration of the wattles and comb, tremors, drooping wings, twisting of the head and neck, or paralysis. These are all warning signs or symptoms of diseases that are infectious. And the 6th one is reporting your sick birds. Early detection is the key. It's very important to prevent disease spread. You do not want to delay. Call the local county authorities or the state veterinary services or the state department of ag if you have sick or dying birds. And finally, my recommendations when it comes to biosecurity: have realistic expectations. Remember, prevention is better than cure. So how do you prevent disease outbreak? Have a sound biosecurity plan in place. You want to periodically review and adapt, right? So if you have changes in the type of operation that you run, you want to adapt to those changes. For example, if you are only growing one type of birds, only say broilers, and then you decided that you wanted a layer flock, you're going to have a different set of biosecurity plan for that in place. Or if you only used to grow one flock of birds, and then you get in another flock, so you had one type of plan in place, but now you decide that, okay, let us have different flocks every 2 weeks. So you have different age birds, you need a different plan, so you need to review and adapt. Control, limit exposure damage to the smallest unit, right? That's how you're gonna control it. Try and limit exposure damage to the smallest unit. And if you have any questions, I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very good. As I said, if you want to type any questions in the chat box or the Q&A, Claudia will deal with those. There were a couple of points I wanted to add to your presentation. I know you focused in on the avian influenza, which was a major impact. There were backyard flocks affected, so it is not just industry that it is important for. But right now we are battling Newcastle disease in
Yes.
California in backyard flocks. The majority of them are actually fighting cocks. And in an effort to get around the surveillance for Newcastle, they have smuggled out fighting cocks to Utah and Arizona and have spread the infection there.
Wow.
Hopefully they got that under control. So Newcastle disease is also something to keep an eye out for. And you talked about bringing in adult birds. If you bring in adult birds, I hate swap meets. That's usually where you have a lot of disease. It's best to buy the birds from NPIP, which is National Poultry Improvement Plan, flocks that have been tested for various diseases, and chicks are safer than bringing in adult birds. So those were just some comments I wanted to add. We do have a question from Johnson County. Are vaccines worth it for poultry? I've heard mixed reviews on the efficiency. I would imagine that would depend on the type of vaccine and the number of birds in the
Exactly. It depends on the number of birds. For backyard flocks, depending on how many birds you have, it might not be worth it. There are different types of vaccines though, so it really depends on the type of vaccine you're talking about.
Our recommendation here in Kentucky is if you don't have a disease problem, you don't have to vaccinate. Some areas in Kentucky and probably in other states have a fowl pox problem.
Right. Yeah, we vaccinate for that here.
Some small backyard flocks do vaccinate for fowl pox. If you have an outbreak of fowl pox, it is effective at controlling the spread within an infected flock, and then you have to continue. Once you've started a vaccine, you have to always use that vaccine, right?
Correct.
So if you're buying chicks that are vaccinated for Marek's disease at the hatchery, all subsequent birds need to be vaccinated for Marek's disease. Vaccinating incorrectly can be more of a problem than not vaccinating at all. So those are always key issues. Anybody else have any questions? For those that are interested, I'll wait for you to type your question, but the next webinar is in 2 weeks. It's actually on a Thursday next time, June 30th at 3 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, and it will be on hosting a coop tour. So if you are like here in Kentucky, in Lexington in particular, the small flock guys get together and they have a tour de coops so that you can go and see the urban poultry facilities and get an idea if that is something you want to do. But as we've learned, disease control can be an issue. So what sorts of things do you need to take into consideration if you're going to put on a tour of urban poultry? So that should be interesting. Dr. Mickey Hall from South Carolina University, well, actually Clemson University in South Carolina will be the speaker on that one. As I said, it's June 13th. I'm not seeing any more questions. Let me send this one off. I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A or the chat box. So that will be the end of it. As I said, this is being recorded, and the recording should be up shortly. It has to download from the website for me to to get it up on the e-learning site. So thank you everybody for attending. It's one of our best turnouts. Thank you, Claudia, for doing it 2 weeks in a row. I really appreciate it. And
I preferred it that way too, Jackie. So when I'm done with it, I'm done.
yeah. And thank you all for attending, and check out the links I put in there for our Facebook page and the link for our website with all the various articles and things that we have. So thank you very much, and I hope to see you again later. Goodbye,
Bye.
Claudia.